Hi everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Tusar Barak, Senior Director of Marketing at LinkedIn Marketing Solutions, and we're here to talk about one of my favorite topics, unlocking the power of thought leadership for B2B marketing and sales. I'm joined today by my friend and co-author of our annual study, Joe Kingsbury, Global Chair of Edelman Business Marketing. Together, we're going to explore how thought leadership can drive demand, increase brand attractiveness, and fuel business growth in today's competitive B2B landscape. Joe, thanks so much for being here today.
It's good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Great to see you again too. So maybe we could just start by giving a little bit of a background. This is the 6th year we've done the report. We have the 2024 LinkedIn Edelman Thought Leadership Report. Maybe tell people a little bit about some standout insights, some background on the report.
Sure, so the theme of this year's report was reaching beyond the ready, and this idea that B2B companies can drive growth by getting out-of-market buyers off the sidelines. If you consider that potentially up to 95% of a given B2B company's customers may not be actively in market at any time, combined with sales cycles extending, lingering economic uncertainty, companies are trying to drive growth wherever they can. So getting those out-of-market buyers active is really, really important. So that was the theme. I would say one of the first kind of key insights is that if buyers are not actively considering a purchase, then they're going to be less receptive to messages about products.
Yeah,
and
particularly
services.
sales messages, right? And things like that.
Exactly,
Yeah.
sales messages. And so in that situation, you have to teach something to the customer about a challenge that they may be facing.
Yeah.
That's an example of thought leadership. And so that's really the first step toward actually stimulating that demand with an out-of-market buyer. So about 75% of the global B2B buyers in the study said that a piece of thought leadership had actually prompted them to research a product or a service that they weren't thinking about buying.
Great.
A second insight is that offense is your best defense.
Okay.
And this idea that 70% of C-suite leaders said that a piece of thought leadership content had actually made them question if they should continue working with an existing supplier or partner.
Oh, a little disruption going on there.
Yeah, seriously. And in fact, about 25% of that group said that they ended up either significantly reducing or even ending a relationship with a supplier or a partner, all because of that thought process that started with engaging with the thought leadership content.
So it's like protecting your core too as a business.
It's absolutely customer retention, and if you're not providing thought-provoking insights to your customers, somebody else will.
Yeah.
And I would say, the third kind of key finding is that we were really surprised to see a pretty major disconnect between buyers and sellers when it comes to the business generating impact of thought leadership. And so, for example, about 86% of global B2B buyers say that if a company produces high quality thought leadership content, that they're more likely to invite that organization into their RFP process.
Oh, nice.
But of the companies that are producing that thought leadership content, only about 38% of them have that same expectation of their publishing efforts. So to us, that's a pretty major disconnect.
Yeah, and it feels like an opportunity really to think about how do we get in the process when we might not even be in the consideration set and use thought leadership as that ability to hit that 95% that's not in market for future time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I know you're familiar with the research, obviously.
We did work on it together.
How do you see the findings of the thought leadership report sort of aligning with LinkedIn's vision for empowering B2B marketers?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is, so you mentioned the 95-5 rule, which we've talked about for a long time now, this idea again that 95% of your buyers aren't currently in market, but the reality is that 5% can dry up pretty quickly, and so you got to make sure you're building the pipeline as a B2B marketer and salesperson, thinking through that. And so it's a form of branding, right? For education and branding. And so the couple of things that really stood out to me about like this whole idea of reaching beyond the ready is thought leadership. For 70% of our respondents, we saw they talked about it creating favorable opinions, right, of an organization. It helps get you in the mindset, in the consideration set when it's time, but it's really about seeding for the future and thinking about the future. And we talk about things like future cash flow in the finance world. It's things like that you're setting up for. The other big thing, and I know for Edelman, trust is a big thing that you guys talk about every year, and we looked into that too, as you know, and the idea that like for decision makers, I think almost 73%, if I remember correctly, talked about this idea of building trust. So thought leadership, high quality thought leadership can really build trust for organizations, for both your current customers from a retention standpoint that we just talked about, but also from potential future prospects and educating them on how it's going. And the other last piece is there's this idea of expanding relationships. So how thought leadership can help expand a relationship, whether it be cross-selling new products, whether it be pricing power, all these things that we found in the report that really has this, potential impact of thought leadership in the future, if you will.
It's a big challenge for
Yeah.
a lot of our clients, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So in terms of your opinions on what are the things you think through of like the most significant implications on the findings of the reports, particularly for B2B marketers, like how can they take these insights to help build their thought leadership strategies for the future?
Well, I think even stepping back for 1 second, right?
Yeah, sure.
Despite the clear, business generating power of thought leadership, we've been studying this now for, almost 7 years. Most of the companies that we talked to and surveyed here tell us that their own thought leadership efforts are still under-resourced.
Yeah.
Year
over year we hear that too.
misused and not measured appropriately. In fact, about 20% of the companies said that they have no measurement plan in place at all for their thought leadership, publishing efforts, which is kind of scary. And about north of 40% of thought leadership producers are still relying on pretty generic metrics like basic website traffic, activity or traffic to social feeds, and that's great. There's definitely a need for that, but those are ultimately not the KPIs that really resonate with and are understood by CEOs,
Yeah.
by boards, et cetera, in terms of the business driving impact. So I think that's a little bit where some of the disconnect really comes into play.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And I think even we talk a lot about high quality thought leadership. I think about a couple of years ago during the pandemic, we did a mini report, if you will, right, around this idea of when people were trying to figure out how to reach people in a time, at the time, remote work was not as big of a thing. Trying to get people in a digital world was very different then. And so we got this glut of content and there was a lot of, frankly, not great content that was also produced. And so trying to stand out was a tough piece. And so making sure we think about that as well is important.
Well, on that point, and I did find it interesting that actually the buyer's view of the quality of the content has actually gone up a little bit, where a lot of it's considered to be pretty good right now, which says that all that sort of the influx of all of the content, it's probably raising the bar because a lot of it is pretty good.
Yep.
But ultimately, to your point, it just makes it even harder to stand out.
Yeah. Well, it's good too to see that like inflection. We hit a point where there was a lot of not so great, and so as we think about year over year, we're seeing how it's starting to get on the upside of better quality content.
Yeah.
Yep.
So in the report, we talk a lot about kind of getting that competitive edge.
Yep.
Partly through thought leadership. I mean, how is LinkedIn supporting B2B marketers in really actually establishing themselves, their executives, and ultimately their companies as thought leaders? What kinds of resources on the platform sort of align most with that?
Totally. So, well, one of the things in the report we looked a lot into both this year and previous years is the importance of humanizing, right? So a lot of times people in the beginning would put out thought leadership from the company, but not think about how to use like executives, how to use people within the organization, how to use third parties to get that content out there. And so at LinkedIn, we're very excited about this idea, and I've talked a lot about this thought leadership ad. So we have a new format where a person can now promote content from a company. And so this idea of like your CEO, your CMO, your CFO, or even your directors, senior directors we can promote those posts so that there is a human aspect of the content that's coming out. It makes it feel not just being heard from an entity, but heard from a person as well. So we just released that a few months ago, and even more exciting actually in the last couple weeks, we just released the ability for third parties. So the idea of influencers, the idea of people who are big in the industry that you work in, being able to have them talk about what's going on and then promote their posts. So that way you can get a higher reach of the different people that are out there. We've also released from LinkedIn Marketing Solutions a number of different ad formats, CTV updates, being able to, in the US, reach specific types of new buyers, new content to be part of that's both on the LinkedIn feed, but also off platform, and following professionals where they are to be able to hit them at the right point of contact with marketing messages that make sense.
It's amazing to see how LinkedIn is really extending all of these capabilities, even sort of outside of your main feed. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, exactly. And so we're super excited about that, and really thinking about how do we think about providing the full suite of ecosystem that exists for a professional, because a professional is a person. This idea of humanizing, we all are people, and so we're all different at different places on making sure we're able to connect with the people both on the digital platform that is LinkedIn, but also off the platform as well, and connect. Yeah. So Joe, I know we're running low on time, but I would love to get your idea of this. What are some of the key points that were mentioned in the report on the impact of thought leadership? And we talked a lot about stimulating demand, but also increasing brand attractiveness. And so we'd love to better understand, like, what are the ways that B2B marketers can effectively harness thought leadership to achieve these objectives?
Half the battle is just being clear on what you want to accomplish.
Yep.
And how it's going to be measured.
Yep.
Just kind of to what I mentioned earlier. I think having clarity on what the KPIs are and alignment across the senior leadership of the company, other important stakeholders, around who exactly is the target audience. What are we trying to accomplish with that audience? And what are we trying to drive them toward? It sounds simple, but I really do think that that's a huge part of actually sort of starting off in the right place, because otherwise you're really just doing content publishing for its own sake.
Yep.
Beyond that, B2B buyers are telling us that they want content that really references strong research and data. They want content to help them better understand their own business challenges. Something that they don't know, something, an opportunity that they may not be thinking about, a threat that they might be underestimating, and what they should do about, those kinds of, issues. And they also want concrete guidance and of course, case studies.
Of course.
Right. So in some ways, it's a little bit meat and potatoes in B2B, but it all kind of adds up to content that is going to be more effective at standing out. Clearly, having a well-respected author or a well-respected, subject matter expert. It doesn't always need to be the CEO or the most famous, leader within the company. But if they are credible and respected on a particular topic, that's really going to go a long way. And then, at the end of the day, we're all, I think, still human beings.
Yeah. Until AI takes over.
Who have who have a lot of things competing for our attention, and we still want to enjoy what we're consuming. So, really just being mindful of, sort of making the content digestible, appealing formats and things of that nature. Kind of round out the insights there.
Yeah, totally. It makes a ton of sense. Well, Joe, thank you so much for being here today. As always, it's a pleasure to have this conversation about our favorite topic, thought leadership in B2B for marketing and sales. And to our viewers, thanks so much for taking the time to tune in. We hope you download the report to be able to learn more. And thanks again for being here.